The old way versus the new way of finding businesses to buy. The old way was pretty straightforward. It went like this. You go look at some listings, you call some brokers return your phone calls, and you just go see what was out there. It was a lot more like, well, the real estate world. It was totally possible to find a deal just from the listings, and brokers were busy, but they weren't barraged to where they didn't return your phone calls at all. But today, the market is totally different. I run a podcast that, looks at companies for sale every week, but have I bought any of them on those listings? No. Because the way of just looking at listings and then making phone calls, it just doesn't work anymore. And if you look in the books about how to buy businesses, that's what they tell you to do. And the truth is, people don't get anywhere doing that approach. You hear these horror stories of people doing searches for 18 months and never finding anything. And you ask what they're doing, and it's doing just that. The old school way of just checking listings and calling brokers and hoping to get lucky. So we need a better way, and let me tell you about it. It's called the treasure hunt. So let's talk about this idea. When you're trying to find a great business to buy, you're not walking through a supermarket, you're on a treasure hunt, and you're looking for a diamond in the rough, something missed by everyone else, and something that you're the perfect buyer for. And when you have this treasure hunt mindset, that informs what you need to do. How are you going to differentiate yourself? Where are you going to hunt? How are you going to sort your leads once you get them and to find that perfect fit for you as a business buyer? What's more, when you go out looking for a deal, a lot of people focus on quantity instead of quality. You want to do the opposite. You want to focus on quality over quantity. Because the perfect search would be you get one business, you talk to one seller, you find a great price, and you buy that one business. Obviously, you don't expect to find treasure the first time you put your shovel in the ground on that deserted island. But that's the mentality that we're going to build as you go look to find a business that's perfect for you to buy. There are thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not more, of businesses that are out there both being sold and available to buy and aren't actively marketed. But we're only going to buy one or just a handful. So you want to find the one that's perfect for you. The new way involves building a thesis. So you want the one business that's perfect for you. Now you need to define exactly what that means. Instead of growing broad, you go deep. You get really specific and you build a thesis about the type of business and the market that you want to be in. And what you do is you niche down to the specific target business that you are the absolute best buyer for. And that's how you can differentiate yourself and also pick a perfect business for you to buy. In the old model, you'd browse all sorts of different businesses and then dig into the ones that you thought looked interesting. But oftentimes, you didn't know anything about those businesses, and there was nothing special about that market that you knew that nobody else knew. Instead, we want to look for an opportunity. And so let's walk through an example. I'd start big picture, looking at a fundamental trend. For example, I'd say there's a fundamental trend that blue-collar talent is going to get harder to find and hire in the United States. That's not going to slow down. A lot of people don't want to do those jobs, and there's more and more licensure and red tape required that makes it hard to learn and be licensed to do those jobs. So that's a fundamental trend. And now I turn that into an investment thesis. My thesis here would be that HVAC companies, so that's heating, air conditioning, all that kind of stuff, those companies are going to get more and more valuable over time as it's harder and harder to find those employees. This ends up with a solid investing thesis, and I could take that and go out and looking specifically for HVAC companies to buy. But of course, finish watching the video first because there's a lot more that we're going to cover because buying HVAC might actually be a bad idea right now based on what's going on in the market. But anyway, we'll keep going. Looking for trends is a good way to look at the markets around you. We don't just browse businesses under the way I approach this. We take a market and we think deeply about it. Then we think about which directions the winds are blowing and what sort of opportunities will that create for us to have a thesis to go find the right business to buy for us and identify where we should hunt. This is where I think we give ourselves the space to let our mind wander. We'll ask why, we'll look at what's going on in the world, and we'll be able to follow lines of thought about the things that are out there and see where those take us. And this is where being well-read and talking to people and getting curious about what's going on in markets around us can really benefit us. If there's an area we're already interested in or we've already worked in already, we can look in those first and dig into those to understand it from as many angles as possible as we can, and then we'll go deep in them. But here's a word of warning. By the time you read about a trend happening and a market starts getting hot, you're probably 2 or 3 years too late. Newspapers, magazines, they're run by reporters. They're often backwards looking. So you have to look for trends that private equity and other big buyers haven't already sniffed out. So our HVAC thesis, PE is snapping up those companies left, right, and center. That doesn't mean it rules out the entire space, but it's definitely a factor for us to consider as we think about picking our first thesis and then going to run a search that backs up that thesis. So while the thesis of HVAC was solid, it's now super expensive to get in the door because you've got big competition as a buyer. Where you'll have the edge on private equity is, being you. It sounds cheesy, But taking a good look at who you are, your strengths, opportunities, and advantages is a key part of making a good investment thesis as you start to go do your search. We'll look at that in the next section.